Hey guys, tonight we're taking you on a slow, sandy stroll into the sweltering heart of the Persian desert. Yes, the kind where your sandals stick to the ground because the earth itself is trying to melt. But tucked within this arid inferno is something so unexpected, it might as well be magic: an ancient refrigerator. A structure that looks like a giant beehive or an upside-down ice cream cone. One that can keep ice solid for months without so much as a whisper of electricity. You, dear listener, are about to time travel into this dusty realm, where heat stroke is a way of life, and yet somehow people drank ice cold rosewater tea. You probably won't survive this barefoot. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is, because I know someone out there is trying to fall asleep at 3:17 a.m. in Detroit. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake up sticky with sweat on a reed mat laid directly on the packed earth floor. A sleepy yawn escapes before the heat slaps you full in the face like a jealous sun god. You sit up slowly in the early dawn haze of ancient Yazd, where the desert doesn't wait for noon to boil your eyeballs. The room is shaded, but the clay walls are already radiating a sleepy warmth, like bread that's almost finished baking. The smell of dust and fresh flatbread hovers in the air. Outside, sand whispers against stone, and a donkey somewhere is having a very emotional morning. You step out, shielding your eyes, blinking as the light smears gold across your vision. It's already 35 degrees Celsius, and you're pretty sure your eyebrows just gave up. The city is quiet, everyone's still clinging to the last vestiges of cool dawn air. Except for you. Because today, you've been invited to see a marvel, a building that keeps things cold in a desert. With no magic, no aircon, no tech support hotline, you shuffle toward it, squinting at the distant dome. It's a strange sight, half monument, half alien spaceship. The locals call it the Yacho, literally ice pit. And spoiler, that name is both exactly what it is and not nearly dramatic enough. As you walk, the world feels oddly muted. The Yacho rises out of the sand like a great earthen breast, rounded, cracked, dignified, and not at all concerned with your modern disbelief. Its conical shape tapers up toward the sky, like it's trying to poke the sun in the eye. But you know what's weirder than a desert building shaped like a scoop of gelato? It works. Still works. Some of these structures, centuries old, are standing even now in Iran, passively cooling air and storing ice like time itself forgot to delete the blueprint. You reach the base. The walls are a light beige, thick with a kind of rough plaster cool to the touch, surprisingly. The structure is built of mud brick and covered in sarouge, a magical cocktail of clay, lime, egg whites, goat hair, and ash. Not exactly FDA approved, but turns out it's waterproof and nearly indestructible when dry. You run your fingers across the wall and feel the chill, not cold, exactly, but cooler than the oven outside. Enough to make your skin shiver in contrast. Inside, the air changes. It's darker, stiller, smells faintly of earth and something old, like a clay pot that once held honey and secrets. You step into the domed chamber. The floor dips down into a basin, the ice pit. No torches here. Just a few shafts of light filtering in from cleverly placed vents. And there, tucked away in shadow, actual, honest Zarathustra ice. You blink twice, rub your eyes. But it's there, stacked in blocks, wrapped in straw, slowly sweating in defiance of logic. Historians still argue whether the Persians discovered this method independently or adapted older Mesopotamian techniques. But nobody debates this. It was genius. The combination of deep pits, thick insulation, and smart airflow turned an arid oven into a cold chamber. You crouch, letting the coolness seep up through your sandals. There's a man stacking ice in silence, humming under his breath. He gestures. You over with a grin and plops a small shard into your palm. It's melting fast, a liquid miracle. You touch it to your neck and feel your soul thank you in 3 languages. Suddenly, you're aware that people lived entire lifetimes in this climate, managed farms, raised kids, and threw feasts with chilled drinks. You look around and wonder, how did they do it? Who figured this out? What possessed someone to dig a giant hole and build a dome over it and then wait for frost? Outside, the sun is now a furnace set to grill. But inside the yakshal, it's bearable. You exhale slowly, adjusting to this gentle paradox, and thus begins your day in the ice business. You shuffle your feet a bit, letting the smooth, hard-packed floor beneath you cool your solace while your eyes adjust to the dim interior. The yakshal looms high above, its conical dome stretching upward like a monument to stubborn genius. You're standing inside what is essentially a sandcastle that tells the sun to sit down and hush. There's no hum of electricity, no blinking thermostats. Just mud, brick, and centuries of architectural sass. You're surrounded by silence, save for the occasional creak of the wooden support beams and the faint whisper of wind slipping through a hidden vent. It feels sacred somehow, like standing in a forgotten temple dedicated to the cult of chill. The walls are nearly 2 meters thick at the base. That's not overkill, it's insulation. Thick enough to defy summer heat, yet still porous enough to breathe. You run your hand along the inside of the dome and feel a ghost of damp coolness, like the last breath of evening lingering on a window pane. A small, barefoot boy darts past you, balancing a clay bowl piled with ice chips. He grins as if to say, yes, we're in the desert, and yes, this is normal. You follow him as he slips through a side door into the outer corridor that curls around the yakshal like a ribbon of shade. You emerge into the rear courtyard, blinking in the dusty light. That's when you see it, a shallow trench, lined with stone, leading into a low wall about half a man tall. On the other side, a raised platform holding the remnants of last winter's haul, blocks of ice wrapped in straw, buried just below the sun's reach. Like sand-colored treasure waiting to be divvied up. The sandcastle, you're starting to realize, doesn't just store ice, it manufactures it. Let's talk about that for a moment. Because while it seems like a paradox, ice in a place where the sun is a tyrant, it's not magic. It's physics, Persian style. They built these structures near water sources or qanats, those ancient underground aqueducts we'll explore later, and directed water into shallow pools beside the yakshal. In winter, desert nights would dip below freezing. The shallow pools, exposed to open sky, would release heat upward and freeze over. No electricity, just radiative cooling. The next morning, before the sun got bossy, villagers would gather the thin ice, layer it into the pit, and insulate it with straw, and repeat. Night after night, until the pit was full, and the summer months looked a little less terrifying. Historians still argue whether this technique was shared across cultures or uniquely refined by Persian engineers. But either way, the sandcastle is the architectural equivalent of a mic drop. You trail your fingers along the edge of one of the shallow water basins. It's dry now, it hasn't seen frost in months, but the grooves carved into the stone hint at its former life. You picture the scene, villagers in layered cloaks, breath fogging the air, scraping up delicate sheets of ice in the pre-dawn. Stillness, a quiet ritual, performed with the precision of people who understand that survival is cold and calculated. And yet, it's not just about surviving. It's about thriving. Ice wasn't hoarded just for emergencies. It was woven into celebration. A cube here, a slush of it there, mixed with rosewater or cooled pomegranate syrup. You think about how something so simple, frozen water, could feel so luxurious. You walk back toward the dome side and run smack into a goat. Well, more of a strong nudge from a grumpy, bleeding blur. Its handler, a wiry older man with a headscarf and the patient face of someone who's dealt with both goats and tourists. Before gives you a half smile. They like the shade, he mutters in Persian accented antiquity. Even the goats know where to go. He leads the animal into a small alcove near the dome, shaded and cool. You realize the yakshul isn't just for ice. It's a microclimate, a small defiance of the world outside. And this sandcastle? It defies logic in its elegance. It works. Without gears, it breathes. It uses shape and shadow and a flirtation with physics to do what no one expects in the middle of a salt-crusted plain. Make and keep ice. You lean against the outer wall, the sun on your shoulders, and realize something. Both beautiful and utterly annoying, this thing was built without blueprints, without CAD software, without temperature sensors. Just observation, intuition, and about 500 years of let's try it this way. And maybe a few cracked eggs, because let's not forget the weird ingredient here, sarouge. The mortar used to seal this whole operation together. Its recipe is 1 part brilliant, 1 part nightmare omelette. Clay, sand, lime, ash, egg whites, and goat hair. The result? A waterproof, heat-resistant plaster that holds up to time, temperature, and occasional goat-related accidents. Historians still debate how the Persians discovered this mixture, whether through experimentation or culinary disaster. But the effect is the same. A building that shrugs at fire and laughs at humidity. You close your eyes for a moment. The wind rustles through the nearby palms, and for a brief second, you forget you're in a desert at all. It's quiet, cool, peaceful, until a chicken flies out of nowhere and startles you into dropping the melting ice shard you've been absent-mindedly licking. You curse softly and laugh. Welcome to Persia. The sandcastle here keeps ice, but the chickens still run the place. You duck back into the shadowy mouth of the yakshul, the sun now fully committing to its daily scorched earth campaign. The air inside still holds its cool defiance, thick and silent, like an old library that only whispers secrets to those who take their shoes off first. You follow a curved ramp downward into the heart of the beast. The descent is gentle but unmistakable. You're entering the ice pit itself. The walls close in just enough to make your footfall sound important. The air down here is different, denser, heavier, and smelling faintly of straw, mineral water, and old ambition. This is the chamber where the ice lives. Not sprawled out luxuriously, mind you, but stacked with brutal precision. Each block was harvested under the stars, transported with care, wrapped in reeds or date palm fibers, and layered like the world's least exciting lasagna. You crouch down and press your hand to one of the slabs. It's cool, colder than your wrist, and glistens ever so slightly. A tiny stream of meltwater snakes along a groove in the floor, disappearing into a drain that leads who knows where. Probably into a small cistern or channel system that recycles it for use, because these ancient engineers weren't into waste. They were into balance. This place, the yakshul, isn't just a building. It's a system. The dome shape isn't aesthetic fluff. It's part of the function. That beehive curve, it minimizes surface area exposed to sunlight. And the inward slope helps convection currents do their magic. Hot air rises and slips out through vents at the top, while cool air stays hunkered down below like a smug cat in a sink. Historians still argue whether this dome-first architecture evolved purely from climate necessity, or if it mirrored some philosophical geometry of Zoroastrian cosmology, symbolic of earth and sky and the connection between worlds. Either way, the effect is the same. The dome is the ice's best friend. The ancient Persians called this whole setup yakshul. Yes, but that word literally means ice pit. The name is humble, understated. It's like calling the Eiffel Tower a tall metal hat. But once you see what it does, how this space manipulates temperature with nothing but physics and sass, you realize why it needed no pump. The yakshul predates modern refrigeration by over 2 millennia. Let that settle. While European nobles were still figuring out forks and worrying about dragons, Persian engineers were chilling milk in the middle of the desert. You think about that as you trail your fingers along the inside of the dome. The curve smooth and hard like stone that learned how to breathe. A man enters with a woven basket strapped across his back. He glances at you, another curious time traveler, and begins unpacking jars of chilled yogurt and a slushy substance that might be early sorbet or might be a mistake. He shrugs and offers you a taste. It's sweet, floral, and brain freeze-inducing. You nod gratefully, even though you're not entirely sure it wasn't partially fermented. He grins and mutters something about golab, rosewater. And suddenly, the air around you takes on a different layer, perfumed, elegant, dreamlike. You realize they didn't just preserve ice in this place. They preserved possibility. Even in the heart of this blistering climate, people dreamed of sweetness, of refreshment, of ritual and relief. The ice was never just ice. It was an offering to comfort, to celebration, to stubborn hope. That you sit cross-legged on the edge of the chamber, sipping your weird rose slush and trying not to think about the fact that someone, somewhere 1,000 years ago, did the exact same thing right here. Possibly also confused about whether it was supposed to fizz like that. Nearby, carved into the wall, you spot faint etchings. Not writing exactly, but maybe symbols. Perhaps inventory tallies. Or maybe just a bored worker doodling. Historians still debate what these markings meant. Some think they were temperature logs. Others argue they were ceremonial or related to Nowruz preparations. One researcher even suggested they might be love notes from ice haulers too. Shy for poetry. The acoustics down here are oddly soothing. You hum a little, and your voice echoes back like a polite ghost. No wonder people liked working here in summer. It was the coolest job in town, both literally and socially. Children too small for fieldwork could help insulate ice with straw. Elders would supervise from shaded corners, murmuring advice and debating whether this year's frost was as good as the ones from back in 948. You hear faint laughter overhead. Someone's dropped a watermelon in the courtyard, and a small flock of sticky children is using the chunks to start an impromptu snack war. You smile and shake your head. The yakshal isn't just science. It's community. You lean back against the cool wall and close your eyes. Just for a moment. The straw scent, the murmuring air, the memory of rosewater, it all blends into a sleepy lull. The desert is still out there, baking everything it touches. But in here, it's another world. A world where ice doesn't melt, where domes whisper wisdom, and where ancient Persian engineers raise one very frosty eyebrow at your high-tech fridge humming in the kitchen. You stir gently from your seated trance, eyes still half-lidded as you push yourself up from the cool, curved wall. The yakshal feels like a womb of physics, a space that shouldn't exist, and yet refuses to disappear. As you step back into the outer corridor, light lances in from a narrow vent, warm and unapologetic. The contrast hits your skin like stepping from a whisper into applause. Your guide, an older man with a face carved by sun and sarcasm, waves you toward the side of the dome. He doesn't speak much, but his gestures are as expressive as a bored house cat. You follow him into a smaller chamber, where a model of the entire yakshal system has been scratched into the floor with what might have once been a spoon or someone's tooth. He taps the dome, then the pool, then a series of pipes that snake around like lost noodles. And suddenly, you see it, not just the dome, but the whole design. This thing is a passive cooling machine. A symphony of mud, math, and meteorology. First, there's the evaporative cooling. You might know this trick. If you've ever stood in front of a swamp cooler or run through a sprinkler like a 5-year-old on a sugar high. When water evaporates, it steals heat. The yakshal takes advantage of this by using water in shallow pools, drawing air over and around them. The effect is subtle but powerful, like nature exhaling over your forehead. Then there's the genius of ventilation. See that tall tower jutting off to the side of the dome like a camel's opinionated cousin? That's a badger or wind catcher. It's not there for decoration. It's a thermal sniper, built to trap cooler breezes and funnel them down into the structure, while drawing hot air up and out like smoke from a magician's sleeve. The walls of the yachtshole are made from that mystical mortar, sarouge, but they're also packed with fine sand and sometimes charcoal to aid in insulation. They slope outward toward the bottom, creating not just structural stability, but also increasing surface contact with the cold earth. The deeper the pit, the colder the soul of the structure becomes. And just in case all that wasn't enough, the builders often planted trees, yes, trees on the sunniest side of the dome to cast shade during peak hours. Environmental design before green architecture was even a thing. Historians still argue whether the Persian engineers designed these features independently or drew influence from earlier Babylonian or Egyptian experiments with passive cooling. But the scale and sophistication here are uniquely Persian. Your guide picks up a small ceramic shard and drops it into one of the side channels. You watch as it skitters down a gentle slope. Water would have done the same, guided by gravity, chilled by airflow, and directed toward collection pits. It's low-tech irrigation meets vague engineering, all without a single moving part. You feel your modern sensibilities slowly dissolve. Suddenly, your air conditioner at home seems needy, clunky, whiny, like it's constantly begging for electricity and threatening to leak freon if you don't pet it regularly. But this is silent, elegant, it just works. You lean into the wall again and let your imagination unfurl. Picture the builders drawing plans not with rulers, but with ropes and shadows. Knowing that the dome had to be exactly so high, the vent precisely so angled, the pit deep enough to scrape the underworld's knuckles. They didn't use thermometers. They used instinct, observation, years of watching how shadows shifted across sand, where the frost clung longest, which direction the night winds preferred to whisper. There's a fringe theory that some of these builders may have aligned their structures with stars or lunar cycles, charting cooling trends based on celestial patterns. While mainstream historians raise eyebrows, there are few old texts that suggest timing the start of ice production with specific moon phases. Whether science or superstition, it worked. You duck beneath one of the wind catchers. Cool air brushes past your cheeks, and for a moment, it's as if the desert sighs. You imagine lying here during a midday rest, the air slipping gently across your neck, your sweat evaporating like a whispered secret. You wonder how many people over the centuries used this exact same trick to get through an afternoon nap. Even now, in modern Yazd and parts of rural Iran, wind catchers and passive cooling are still used. Some homes combine them with modern ACS to reduce energy load. Some don't need electricity at all. The designs have changed little. Why mess with perfection? You step back out into the courtyard, the sky above a flat sheet of copper. A donkey eyes you with the weary suspicion of someone who's watched tourists try to eat ice before it's fully frozen. You crouch beside one of the long, shallow freezing channels. The basin is dry now, but in your mind's eye, it fills under a velvet night sky. Still, silent. Then the frost forms first thin, like sugar, then thickening with each breath of freezing wind. Villagers would wait before dawn to skim it, fingers numbing, giggles muted by fogged breath. And maybe, just maybe, a child would sneak a shard into their sleeve later to be dropped dramatically into their sister's lap. Because even ancient ice had sibling rivalry potential. You shake your head and smile. This wasn't just engineering, it was daily life. Woven into routines, festivals, kitchen prep, and bedtime stories. In all of it, every slab of ice, every breath of cool air begins with the simple truth that heat rises and clever humans don't. Night falls with a sigh in the Persian desert. slipping in like a cat over the dunes. One moment the world is dust and glare, and the next it's a deep indigo wash. The sky stitched with 1,000 stars that seem far too enthusiastic for this hour. The temperature drops like a hint in a spy novel suddenly, without warning, and with implications. You're back outside now, standing beside one of the freezing pools, barefoot on stone still radiating a memory of daylight. The air has cooled. Enough that you're no longer sweating just from thinking. You take a deep breath, and it smells different, cleaner, faintly floral with a hint of wet clay. That scent means the water's been released. Tonight is ice-making night. You're handed a flat wooden tool somewhere between a spatula and a ceremonial pizza paddle, and beckon toward a row of shallow channels. Water trickles into them, gently, guided by a sluice system with the precision of a chess master. The moon, already high, glints off the surface. It's like standing in a stone vineyard, except every grape is liquid and the harvest comes in frost. You kneel and smooth out the surface of the water, guided by the experienced gestures of a middle-aged woman who clearly hasn't slept during a full moon since 943 CE. She says nothing but gives a tiny nod when your motions stop sloshing like an idiot. You take that as a good sign. And now, you wait, because here's the thing about making ice in the desert. It doesn't happen with brute force. It's finesse. It's patience. And it's the precise harmony of clear skies, low humidity, and long cold nights. This is radiative cooling in action. Heat doesn't just move from hot to cold, it radiates upward into the sky, especially when there's nothing like clouds to bounce it back down. These shallow pools are exposed on purpose. The water loses heat to the vast emptiness of space, and if the conditions are right, the top layer freezes before dawn. Historians still debate exactly how ancient Persians understood this. Did they know the physics? Or did they just observe that, hey, when we leave water out overnight in this exact place under a clear sky, it turns into something we can chip into a drink? The current academic consensus leans toward empirical wisdom, generations of trial and error, marked down not in textbooks but in old stories and seasonal rhythms. Lie on your back beside the channel, staring up at the moon. It's full tonight, and the stars are doing their thing, twinkling, just enough to remind you that they probably saw all of this before. Some distant wind pushes against the sand, rustling tamarisk leaves and sending a whisper down the Kanat channel behind you. Somewhere, a jackal sings a bluesy note to no one in particular. Nearby, other villagers move like slow dancers in the moonlight, checking channels, smoothing water, adjusting straw screens to block errant breezes. It's so quiet that you can hear the crackle of tiny frost crystals beginning to form. Yes, really. It's a sound like whispered secrets between glass and stars. You wonder how many civilizations missed this possibility entirely. How many desert dwellers accepted that heat ruled without question, but not here. The Persians didn't just live with their environment, they negotiated with it. Respectfully, but firmly. At some point, your guide reappears with 2 cups of something thick and herbal. He hands you one, and it tastes like mint, honey, and possibly a mild sedative. You don't ask. You just sip. There's a fringe theory among some regional scholars that certain nights based on lunar phases, humidity, and wind direction were considered favorable for frost. These were marked in old almanacs and whispered from elder to apprentice. Modern climatologists sometimes laugh at the idea of lucky nights, but those same climatologists still can't predict with certainty when the exact dew point will align. Just so, you glance back at your freezing pool. A thin white glaze is forming across the top, delicate, fragile, but undeniably real. You resist the urge to poke it barely. A teenage boy to your left does not resist. He pokes his pool and gets a scolding whisper from the elder woman. You share a look with him, classic rookie mistake, and he shrugs. Some things, apparently, transcend millennia. By dawn, if the weather holds and the gods aren't in a mood, you'll have sheets of ice thin as papyrus, ready to be scraped, stacked, and stored. And if not, you try again. Because in the desert, nothing is guaranteed. Not frost, not shade, not even a breeze. But when it does work, when you hold a sliver of frozen water in your hand as the sun crests the mountains, you don't just feel smart, you feel victorious. You lean back again, eyes fluttering closed for a moment. The cold seeps up from the stone, kissing your skin, reminding you that sometimes, even in the harshest places, quiet miracles are possible. And tomorrow morning, you'll be part of one. The rooster doesn't crow, it groans. Somewhere beyond the dunes, the horizon bleeds a soft peachy gold, and the temperature has already begun its slow, inevitable rise toward oven with no off switch. But here in the shadow of the actual, you're not waking up, you're already up, crouched beside the shallow freezing channels with your wooden scoop in hand, and sleep clinging to the edges of your eyes like a stubborn stain. The night was kind. You lean over the pool, and there, it is thin sheets of ice glistening beneath a layer of dew. The layer is delicate, crystalline, and as you run your fingers just above it, the air feels charged, sacred, like the water decided to become solid out of pure willpower. Your guide gives a short whistle and everyone springs into action. It's not frantic, it's rehearsed, calm, efficient. The kind of choreography that only comes from hundreds of years of do this before the sun ruins everything. You kneel and gently break the first sheet with the edge of your paddle. It cracks like fine porcelain, curling slightly as you lift it, edges gleaming. You place it into a straw-lined basket and immediately cover it with more straw to delay the melt. Your body aches from crouching, but there's something meditative about the rhythm scoop. Slide, wrap, repeat. All around you, families are harvesting ice like it's wheat. Some hum softly. One boy is whistling a tune that's probably older than your country. Chickens peck around the edges of the channel, and you swear one of them winks at you. You glance over at a group of teenagers. They're taking turns skating. Thin wooden sandals across the ice channels, slipping and laughing until an elder catches them and launches a sandal in their direction. Disciplinary sandal throwing, apparently, is a multi-generational tradition. Once the baskets are full, a small procession forms, people carrying the precious cargo toward the dome, each block like a frozen memory. You join them, sweating already despite the morning chill. The sun has risen fully now, a glaring eye peeking over the horizon, like it knows exactly how short the ice's life would be without shelter. Inside the actual, it's still cool. The temperature drop is immediate and forgiving. You unload your basket, layering the ice blocks with straw and reeds. They hiss softly as they settle, sweating already. But here, at least, they'll endure. For a while, there's a ledger of sorts scratched into the wall near the entrance, tallies of how much ice each family contributes and receives. The community runs on this record keeping. You see a few symbols that repeat: a goat, a star, a palm. Frond, probably shorthand for clan names or distribution marks. Historians still argue over their precise meanings, with some insisting they were early bureaucratic scripts and others suggesting they were just a clever form of ice claim graffiti. Step back and wipe your brow, feeling the sweat evaporate almost instantly. It's a dry heat, yes, the classic excuse, but it is still heat. You know you've only got a few hours before the desert starts taking things personally. Back outside, you find the others gathered under a canvas awning. There's tea. There's dates. And best of all, someone cracks open a clay jar of chilled yogurt drink, flecked with mint and dill. It's tart, bracing, and tastes like someone milked a cloud. You gulp it down like a pro and immediately regret the speed. Brain freeze. In a dessert. Irony achieved. The man beside you claps your shoulder and chuckles. First time? He says in Farsi, or maybe just universal body language. You nod, still grimacing, and he hands you a small cube of ice wrapped in fig leaf. For the king, he says with a wink. Or the idiot who drinks too fast. The rest of the morning is quieter. Some people take their share of ice back to cool cisterns at home. Others trade small blocks for food, medicine, or tools. You watch an old woman hand over a single chunk in exchange for a bundle of saffron. Another gives hers to a young mother with an overheated baby. There's a system, a kindness, and an understanding that in this place, coolness is life. You help. Clean out the channels, sweeping away bits of straw, draining leftover water, resetting the stage for tonight's freeze. It's already hot again. The sun presses down with all the subtlety of a toddler in a bounce house. You pass a teenage boy sharpening one of the wooden paddles. He looks up and grins. "Tonight," he says, "we race." You squint. "On the ice?" He nods, always. Apparently, after the serious work is done, there's tradition barefoot sliding races across the pools before they're filled again. You make a mental note to prepare your ankles. For now, though, you retreat into the shade. The yakshal stands tall behind you, the dome glowing faintly in the morning light. It doesn't look like a miracle. It just is one. Quiet, unassuming, enduring. And every morning before the sun claims the world, people harvest cold from the sky. You're back inside the yakshal now, seated cross-legged on a woven mat, sipping another questionable yogurt drink that may or may not contain more dill than morally acceptable. The air is still cool in here, like the last breath of a snowman. Someone is rubbing their back against a wall absent-mindedly. It's the oldest trick in the book for cooling down without letting on you're slowly melting inside. Your attention drifts to a pile of coarse sacks stacked near the dome's inner wall. The elder beside you catches your gaze and gives a toothy grin. "Saruj," he says, pointing at the pile like it's a treasure hoard. Then, in a tone reserved for those about to perform sacred rites, he adds, "Come." You follow him through a low arched doorway into what might generously be called the mud lab. It's more of a shaded work alcove with buckets, mixing troughs, and a donkey staring at a wall like it's trying to write poetry with its mind. In the corner, a shallow pit is filled with a thick, grayish mixture, part paste, part wet sandcastle. That's your first encounter with Saruj, the unsung hero of desert refrigeration. This magical mortar isn't just mud. It's science, witchcraft, possibly both. The recipe varies slightly by region, but the basic ingredients are consistent. Clay, sand, lime, ash, egg whites, and sometimes goat hair. Yes, goat hair. For strength, flexibility, and perhaps to keep the local goats humble. You're handed a wooden paddle and instructed to stir the mixture. It resists you at first, viscous, stubborn, slightly resentful of your modern hands. But as you mix, you begin to feel a change, smooth out. It thickens into a texture somewhere between cold oatmeal and regret. And somehow this goop, once dried and cured, becomes waterproof, heatproof, and timeproof. You smear a handful on a brick as instructed. The elder watches with the seriousness of a man grading soufflés. After a moment, he nods. Good enough for a wall. Not for the ceiling. You've been judged by mud. Historians still argue about the origins of Saruj, whether it was invented by accident when someone dropped breakfast into a lime pit, or as a deliberate evolution of ancient Mesopotamian mortar. Some believe it was refined over centuries through trial and error. Others suspect it was passed along trade routes, like a secret family recipe for immortality. Whatever its story, it works out the waterproofing properties of Saruj made it ideal not only for yakshals, but also for water cisterns, bathhouses, and qanats. It seals without cracking. It breathes just enough to avoid mildew. And unlike modern concrete, it doesn't weep for no reason. You ask the elder how long a Saruj wall lasts. He shrugs. Longer than you, he says, sipping his tea. You step back and look at the yakshal again. Its soft beige walls, curving with quiet pride. Those walls were lined and repaired with Saruj every few years. A tradition. A necessity. And possibly the only time a village-wide egg white collection drive made sense. There's even a story whispered among workers, half joke, half warning, that if you skimp on egg whites, the wall will sweat and drip vengeance onto your best sandals. Some claim that in ancient times, builders would test new batches by leaving a slab in the sun for 7 days. If it cracked, the batch was cursed. If it didn't, it joined the dome. And if it sprouted mold, the goats got blamed. Naturally. Your hands now smell faintly of ash and egg. Not unpleasant, just earthy. You wipe them on your robe and return to the dome's main chamber, where a few workers are patching a crack near the base. They spread the sarouge with wide, confident strokes. It goes on smooth, and then they press woven mats over its straw, embedded for texture. You notice how the repair blends almost seamlessly into the older wall. It's like watching a surgeon stitch up. Time. You sit for a while, mesmerized. The yakshol breathes gently around you. Above, the dome's apex has a small vent, open now to release any rising heat. When night comes, it'll be sealed to trap the chill. You think about your home refrigerator. The hum again. The occasional growl that makes you worry about sentience. And then this silent structure that functions year after year with no moving parts. Just design, material, and a stubborn refusal to accept that hot has to mean miserable. One of the children wanders in, trailing bits of straw, and flops dramatically onto the floor. "It's too hot," she whines in Farsi. Her grandmother points to a block of ice near the corner. The child groans theatrically and crawls toward it like a desert explorer reaching the last mirage. You chuckle. Some things don't change. By late afternoon, the repair is done. The new patch gleams slightly under the dim light, wet, fresh, but proud. It'll cure overnight. By morning, it'll be just another part of the dome. And in a few years, when the next crack forms, someone else will smear on a new layer and whisper thanks to the goat that shed hair just right. You run your fingers one last time along the smooth edge of the wall. It feels like history you can touch, hold, mix in a bucket and smear with your own hands. Sarouge isn't glamorous. It doesn't sparkle or glow, but it holds the cold. And in a place like this, that's all the magic anyone needs. Afternoon settles over the desert like a thick, sandy blanket. The air outside shimmers. You squint, and the yakshal's dome seems to wobble slightly, the way hot air dances above asphalt. Except this isn't a mirage. It's the one place in town where the heat doesn't win. You step back inside the dome, seeking shelter from the relentless sun, and this time you're taken on a tour most people miss: the ventilation system. Specifically, the Badger's tall, thin wind towers that stick out of buildings like fancy chimneys in reverse. These ancient inventions are less vent and more air wizard. You begin at the base of one. Your guide, a wiry man with a beard that looks like it's been weathered by generations of wind, taps the wall beside it. "Breathe," he says. And the Badger obliges. A soft breeze drifts down from above, cool against your cheeks. It smells faintly of dust and triumph. You glance upward. The tower above you stretches at least 30 feet, its open slats facing into the prevailing winds. The design is deceptively simple. Catch cool air, funnel it downward, and push warm air out. It's the architectural equivalent of a polite exhale. You climb a narrow staircase spiraling around the tower. At the top, a shaded viewing platform gives you a sweeping look across the desert rooftops. Dozens of badgers rise from homes and cisterns like watchful sentinels. Some are square, others octagonal, depending on when and where they were built. But the principle is the same: catch, cool, and release. You lean over the edge of one slat, and the wind rushes past your face with surprising force. It's not the kind of wind that rattles windows. It's quiet, intentional, a stream of comfort built into clay and stone. You descend again and duck into A side corridor built directly beneath the wind tower. The breeze meets you there too, funneled through a narrowing shaft that increases. It's speed, it's physics, sure, but it feels like sorcery. No fans, no power. Just an understanding of pressure differentials and thermal gradients. Historians still argue whether the Persians invented the badger independently or adapted it from earlier Egyptian or Babylonian systems. What's certain is that they perfected it, marrying it with yakshuls, mosques, bathhouses, and homes. Even elite mansions in hot cities like Yazd and Kashan had them, carved elaborately and celebrated like trophies. And they weren't just practical. They were status symbols. The taller your wind catcher, the more advanced your house. A medieval Persian flex, if you will. And while your neighbor might brag about a new carpet, you'd point to your octagonal badger and whisper, "Mine sings." In the summer, your guide shows you one of the more complex systems. It's a twin tower design, where one catches the breeze and the other acts as a chimney, creating a continuous draft. The air moves across shallow water pools, evaporative cooling again, before sweeping through the chambers. It's like walking through a naturally air-conditioned maze. You sit down in one of these cooled chambers, and the contrast with the outside world is immediate. There's a silence here too, not just absence of noise, but a kind of stillness that feels engineered. A pocket of atmosphere carved into the desert. Your skin cools, your breath slows. You almost fall asleep sitting up. One of the workers' fans himself lazily and mutters, "This is why we don't rush." You nod. Rushing in this heat is a form of violence against yourself. Better to sit, sip something tepid, and let the badgers do the heavy lifting. There's a fringe theory that some of the tallest badgers in major cities also served as rudimentary sound amplifiers, funneling call to prayer chants farther across rooftops. While that might be poetic conjecture, you do notice how the wind tower hums slightly, a low, continuous tone like the world whispering in its sleep. The yakshul's own badger isn't the tallest, but it's perfectly placed, aligned with the seasonal winds, slanted, just enough to guide, not fight the breeze. You admire that philosophy. Ancient builders didn't try to dominate nature. They collaborated with it, studied it, got on a first-name basis with it. And in return, nature sometimes said, "Okay, I'll let you keep your yogurt cool." You exit the cooling chamber and step into the now blinding afternoon glare. The dessert hits you again, reminding you who's boss. But this time, you don't panic. You know where to step, where the shadows linger longer. You pass under overhangs, designed to break the sun's angles, walk along pale stone paths that reflect heat rather than absorb it. This isn't just a building, it's climate armor. You glance up at the dome. No fans, no compressors. Yet inside, ice still rests in straw nests. Children nap on cool mats. Water stays crisp. You begin to wonder, what would it be like to build a house like this today? To design a life around wind and shade and patience, instead of outlets and air filters? You don't have an answer, but you do know this. You've never felt more grateful for a breeze. Back under the dome, the ice pit is quiet again. Straw mats have been laid down for the midday rest. Someone hands you a small cloth soaked in rosewater. You press it to your neck and let out a sigh that feels older than language. Above you, the badger sighs too. A slow, steady breath from a structure that's been exhaling for centuries. The yakshul rests behind you now like a sleeping beast, its domed back curved in slumber, shaded and quiet under the deepening blue of evening. But before the frost returns and the channels fill once more, there's work to be done. Not just the hands-on, mud-on-sleeves kind of work. No, this is administrative. Welcome to the ice logistics meeting. You're seated in a semicircle with the rest of the village. Delegation on a raised terrace that catches just enough breeze to be tolerable. In front of you, a wide, flat clay board has been dusted with charcoal and marked with a rudimentary calendar. Dots, scratches, and little fishbone-like symbols mark each family's allocation. You blink, because yes, they had spreadsheets. They were dusty, but they worked. A woman with sharp eyes and a reed stylus stands at the head of the gathering. She clears her throat and begins assigning ice, carefully, deliberately, and with the tone of someone who has absolutely seen what happens when someone tries to sneak an extra block. You quickly learn that ice in this community isn't distributed equally. It's distributed fairly. Those with infants or elders get a bit more. Families who helped with last night's harvest are bumped up the list. And if your goat wandered into the freezing channels and broke something, you're bumped down. Democracy Persian style. You sit back amazed. This is serious business. Ice isn't just a luxury. It's the seasonal bloodstream of this desert society. Used for medicine, food preservation, rituals, and even gas barter. Yes, ice as currency. Historians still debate how formalized the ice economy really was. Some believe that yachtrills operated as quasi-cooperatives, with citizens pitching in labor in exchange for frozen dividends. Others argue that it was more hierarchical, with wealthy families having priority access and ice stewards controlling the rest. What is clear, however, is that planning was everything. You sip from a ceramic cup of watered-down wine flavored faintly with something tart, maybe barberry or sour orange, and try to follow the flow of the meeting. It's a balancing act between meteorology, resource management, and mild neighborhood gossip. At one point, two men argue over who gets the good corner of the ice pit. Apparently, one side melts slower, and their dispute has a history. You glance down at the chart again. Days are marked not just by dates, but by moon phases, known cool winds, and festival times. There's a symbol next to the upcoming solstice, a coiled serpent. You're told this indicates the high melt, the week when temperatures spike, and emergency rationing kicks in. You ask what happens if someone needs more ice than they were allotted. The response? They better be trading something real. Good. Ice trades aren't just bartering, they're social events. Wrapped in cloth, carried in cool satchels, and handed over with as much gravitas as a royal decree. And the real twist? Ice isn't always used immediately. Some families bank. It's saving up for weddings or Nowruz feasts. A cousin stored enough last year for cold sherbet and snowball fights. You imagine that throwing snow at your cousin in the middle of a 42 degrees Celsius afternoon. That's not just fun. That's a power move. The meeting continues into twilight. Torches are lit. Children shuffle around the edge, clearly eavesdropping and giggling anytime someone's name is called. You see small satchels of straw-wrapped ice being passed from hand to hand. Like hot gossip with a melting deadline, one man lean and wiry, with a small scar across his brow, steps up and offers a trade. A goat hair cloak in exchange for an extra night's ice harvest. There's a pause. The woman at the head tilts her head. The cloak is examined. There are murmurs of approval. Deal. It's subtle, but you realize you're watching a microeconomy in real time. One where the unit of value isn't gold or coin but cold. You learn that some years, during especially brutal summers, ice was even stored under armed watch. Not to protect it from theft, necessarily, but to prevent desperate families from breaking into the stores before their allotment. It wasn't common, but it happened. You glance toward the ice pit again. It's not just a hole, it's a vault. A bank. A freezer/social-contract. Your guide leans over and whispers. Once, a man tried to fake his household count to get more ice. Said he had twins. You raise an eyebrow. He didn't? The guide shakes his head. He had one very round cat. You snort into your cup. As the meeting wraps up, final allocations are scratched into the board. The stylus taps like a metronome. Ice will be harvested again tomorrow night. The community knows who gets what, who owes what, and who definitely should keep their cat out of the records. As you stand to stretch, you realize something. This isn't just climate adaptation. This is civilization flexing its muscles. The yakshal is not merely about surviving the heat. It's about doing it with grace, fairness, and the occasional passive-aggressive jab across the ice ledger. And maybe, just maybe, if your family plays its cards right, you'll have enough frozen stash to make sherbet and chill the cousin who keeps bragging about his donkey's new saddle. You find yourself walking back toward the yakshal with a small, leaf-wrapped parcel in hand, your official ice share for the day, about the size of a cantaloupe, cool and sweating softly like a bashful date. It's nestled in straw, tied with twine, and you've been instructed not to shake it unless you enjoy rehydrating your sandals with melted dignity. As you step into the main thoroughfare, the desert town is buzzing. It's festival time, Nowruz, the Persian New Year, and the air has shifted. Not in temperature, still brutal, but in spirit. You hear laughter echoing off adobe walls, the clatter of pots, and a familiar tune played on a flute that sounds suspiciously like someone just learning it badly. Vendors line the edges of the main square, shaded under rough awnings. Someone's selling pomegranate syrup in tiny clay jars. Someone else is shouting the price of pickled turnips like it's the cure for sadness. But what gets your attention is the line forming near the center fountain. A crowd huddled around an impossibly tall jar of what looks like ice cream. You squint, not just ice cream. Falude, a miraculous icy dessert made from frozen vermicelli. Noodles drenched in rosewater, lime juice, and occasionally a splash of sour cherry syrup. The crowd is loud, the vendor louder. You step closer, heart racing with the kind of excitement reserved for both ancient culinary innovation and the chance to eat something frozen before it becomes soup. You watch the vendor work. He unwraps a slab of stored ice from its straw cocoon and places it into a giant basin. A helper shaves it using a blade attached to a pole, catching the curls in a shallow dish. Then he mixes in the noodles and syrups, stirs with dramatic flair, and hands it off to the next wide-eyed customer. Your turn. You step up, offer a copper coin and a shy nod, and receive a dish so cold it fogs the air. You sit on a sun-bleached stone and take the first bite. It's cold, it's sweet. It's a floral slap in the face, followed by a cooling hug. You may never recover. This is ice's celebration. Not utility, not ration. Joy. Historians still debate how widely accessible frozen treats like faluda were in ancient Persia. Some say it was an elite delicacy. Others argue that clever storage and community-focused yakshal access allowed even modest families to enjoy it on holidays. One popular theory? Families pooled their ice shares on festival days to create enough for everyone's shared joy over private hoarding. You finish your dessert just in time to be dragged gently, but insistently into a street performance. A troupe of dancers weaves between townsfolk in colorful robes, faces painted with saffron and charcoal designs, moving in circular patterns that mimic the sun, the moon, and oddly enough, the dome of the yakshal, art imitating architecture. Children run past with handfuls of crushed ice, giggling as they sneak up behind relatives and drop it down the backs of tunics. A woman nearby squeals, then laughs, and retaliates by flinging a palmful of ice at her niece's sandals. You smile. It's not a snowball fight. It's a frost-based family drama. You remember the small parcel in your hand, your own ice block. It's slowly sweating through the leaf. Someone next to you offers a clay cup of warm tea and suggests you drop a chip into it. For balance, they say you do. The ice clinks, hisses, and melts just enough to transform the tea into something new, cool on the tongue, warm in the chest, much like the day itself. Later, as the sun begins to lower and the shadows stretch across the plaza like lazy cats, you wander to the far end where the elders are seated. One of them is carefully slicing a fig over a chilled stone slab. Yes, chilled kept cool by being stored in the yachtshell earlier that morning. He places the slices on small pieces of bread with soft cheese and hands you one. You take a bite. It's not just food. It's climate history in your mouth. This entire festival, this entire way of being, has been shaped by the simple act of refusing to surrender to heat. Of saying, yes, this place is hard, but we're harder. Also, we brought rosewater. You sit beside the old man. He nods. Cold is for sharing, he says. And revenge. You blink. He gestures toward the children sneaking up on a napping uncle with ice in their fists. You both watch the ambush unfold. Moments later, the square erupts in gentle chaos. Squeals, laughter, retaliatory flicks of cold water. It's part feast, part mischief, part meteorological miracle, and always backed by the quiet, faithful presence of the yachtshell, not just a storage unit. A social engine. A monument to seasonal magic. As you lean back on your elbows, watching a child balance a cone of crushed ice on his head like a crown, you realize something profound. The yachtshell didn't just preserve food. It preserved moments. You're lying on your back now, stretched out on a woven mat placed just outside the yachtshell's entrance. It's night again. The festival is winding down, but the echoes of laughter still bounce off distant walls. Somewhere nearby, someone is singing very softly in a minor key, the kind of lullaby that sounds like it's meant more for the stars than for children. The breeze has returned cool, dry, careful. It slips past your ear and into the vents above, like even the wind knows where it's supposed to go in this place. You close your eyes, but not for long. Because just as you start to drift, a small flour-dusted hand tugs your sleeve. It's a young boy, his cheeks smudged with ash and sugar, and he's grinning like he's got a secret. You want to see the snowballs? He whispers out obviously, yes. You follow him around the back of the dome, past where festival lanterns sway on. Strings and chickens are finally off duty. He leads you to a narrow cellar entrance, half buried in the ground, guarded by two suspicious cats who definitely know the combination but aren't sharing. Inside, it's dim but delightfully chilly. The walls are lined with shelved stone, slabs cooled from the inside by airflow from the yachtshell's pit. On one shelf sits a large ceramic bowl covered in cloth. The boy lifts the cloth like he's revealing treasure. Inside, balls of ice, rolled in crushed rose petals, stashed like forbidden fruit. You stare. He beams. For tomorrow, he says. But maybe we forget one. This child has a future in espionage. He hands you one. It's small, about the size of a walnut, and very cold. You hold it in your palm, marveling at the craftsmanship. Perfectly round, faintly floral, and so much more than novelty. This is what stored ice means. It means being able to play, even in a place where heat rules. It means surprise, joy, mischief. It means tradition, passed hand to sticky hand. The boy vanishes back into the darkness, clutching his snowball like a champion. You head back outside, now thinking about how ice wasn't just a food preserver or medicine cooler. It was a asterisk social tool asterisk. You make your way toward the central courtyard, where a small gathering remains seated around a low table. Tea is being poured, flatbread is torn, and chilled fruit is being passed from hand to grateful hand. You join them, invited silently with a smile and a nudge. Someone hands you a fig stuffed with frozen yogurt, the kind that melts the second it touches your lips and makes your eyes roll back in gratitude. The man across from you is telling a story animated, with hand gestures that suggest either a lion or a very dramatic goat, and between bursts of laughter, he tosses bits of ice into people's drinks without asking. It's chaotic generosity, and that's when you hear the phrase for the first time. Yaki sabs. Green ice. You raise an eyebrow. Someone explains. It's a local term for the first, freshest ice of the season. Not green in color, but in spirit new, pure, full of promise. Traditionally, it was used for the first big celebration of spring, or given as a gift to someone returning from a long journey. Historians still debate whether this phrase had official status or was just regional slang, but ancient records do mention ceremonies involving the first frost and its symbolic distribution, and you're holding some of it now. Not the first of the season, maybe, but someone's first. You bite into a frozen grape and let the cold wash through you like a reset button. The surrounding chatter fades into background hum, like the purring of a well-tuned badger. Then, as if summoned by your thoughts, a breeze slips down from one of the vent towers. It brushes your neck and curls under your collar like a polite ghost. You lean back and smile. The dome looms behind you, unmoving, unimpressed, immortal. And yet everything around it, the stories, the rituals, the ice-rolled mischief circles, and breathes because of it. There's a fringe belief among some villagers that each yakshal has a spirit, not a haunting, more of a guardian, a consciousness formed from years of breath, frost, and laughter. And that when a child is born, a whisper of that cool breath touches their brow and blesses them with calm. You're not sure you believe it, but the breeze does feel unusually well-timed. Someone passes you a bowl of ice chips drizzled with grape molasses. Someone else drops a petal into your cup and calls it desert perfume. The night deepens, but the chill lingers, not from the sky but from the yakshal, still giving, still sharing. And all you can do is sit there cooled and content, wondering how something so quiet could shape so much joy. By the next morning, you've grown cocky. You wake early, stretch like a cat that's been to finishing school, and declare to no one in particular, I'm going to find the cannock today. A few chickens cluck, unimpressed, but your guide nods, shrugs, and hands you a rolled-up cloth hat and a waterskin. Don't fall in, he adds, which is simultaneously charming and terrifying. Because today, dear listener, you're going underground to the arteries that fed the mighty yakshal, the ancient Persian Qanat system. The entrance is unassuming. A small hole in the earth near the edge of the village, framed with rough stones and a rope ladder. You descend carefully, your sandals skimming the packed earth, and after a few meters of shadowed awkwardness, you're standing in a tunnel. It's narrow, about shoulder width, and tall enough to walk upright if you're modest in height and modest in ego. The walls are cool, damp, and smell of mineral-rich water and very old effort. This Qanat is part of a vast network of underground aqueducts carved by hand over generations, designed to transport water from highland sources to lowland cities, using nothing more than gravity and tenacity. No pumps, no magic, just slope. How precise was that slope? We're talking 1 part in 1,000, an almost imperceptible descent that allowed water to flow steadily over tens of kilometers, all without eroding the walls or stagnating. Historians still marvel at how these were surveyed. Some think they used water levels and sun shadows. Others believe it involved sheer stubbornness and a generational memory of dig here, not there. Either way, it worked. You walk deeper into the tunnel. The temperature drops. The air becomes laced with the kind of humidity that would make your pores applaud. Water trickles in a narrow channel at your feet, clear, cold, and moving like it has somewhere to be. This is how the yakshal survives summer. The Qanats feed it. Silent, hidden, relentless. You pause at a junction where a vertical shaft leads upward, a mother well, connecting this tunnel to the surface. It lets in light, air, hope. You crane your neck upward and glimpse the sky, framed in a perfect circle. This is how they dug the Qanats in the first place, one vertical shaft at a time, like building a tunnel with dozens of periscopes. You climb up partway, peek out, and see a line of these openings stretching across the landscape, little stone halos dotting the sand, each one a breath in the lungs of the aqueduct. And here's a fun fact. Those shafts weren't just for construction or ventilation. They were also used to remove debris, lower workers, and occasionally Lower nosy guests like yourself into moments of dusty humility. You crawl back down and continue along the tunnel. Your guide explains that each qanat has a name, usually tied to its source spring or the village it serves. They're mapped, revered, and in some regions, legally protected. Water from them is allocated almost like inheritance. Family rights passed down with the gravity-fed flow. There's a fringe belief that disturbing the qanat without proper rituals brings bad luck, or worse, disrupts the balance of the water spirit. Whether metaphor or tradition, the message is clear. These tunnels are sacred, and you can see why. Every cool sip you've had, every icy dessert, every frost-covered grape traced back to this underground marvel. Eventually, you reach a fork in the tunnel. One path continues toward the city cistern. The other veers toward the Yakshal's pit. You follow the latter. It emerges into a smaller chamber beneath the Yakshal, cool, almost cold. This is the source point. Water trickles here, stored in holding basins or directed into shallow channels. From here, it can be used to fill freezing pools, top off ceramic jugs, or refresh thirsty goats who aren't too picky. The stonework is rudimentary but effective grooves, basins and spillways, carved into the floor with care. You crouch and dip your fingers into one of the channels. The water bites back with a chill that feels like it remembers snow. You sit for a moment. Just you, the sound of trickling water, and a dome of silence above. It's a cathedral of practicality, and it humbles you. Back on the surface as you emerge blinking into the light, a young girl offers you a cup of that same water, now flavored with crushed mint and a hint of lemony herb. You drink slowly. And that's when it clicks. The Yakshal doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a system, an ecosystem of earth, water, wind, and willpower. The qanats are its veins, the badgers its lungs, the saruj its skin, and the people? Its heartbeat. As the girl skips away with your empty cup, you look toward the dome in the distance and realize it's not just how they made cold in the desert. It's how they kept it flowing. Back above ground, the sun is still in a long-term relationship with your scalp. The air has gone from pleasantly dry to open-air bread oven, and you're pretty sure your shadow just asked for a parasol. But the Yakshal? Still cool, still unbothered. You step back inside the dome, retreating once more into its shadowy hug, and find a few locals stretched out on straw mats, sipping chilled drinks and gossiping like desert aristocrats. You take a spot on the edge of the ice pit, legs dangling over the side, and lean back with a sigh. The walls breathe around you, cool air rising slowly, slipping up through the dome's apex vent like it's too polite to linger. It's here, in this moment of nothingness, that you realize something. This place doesn't just resist heat. It uses it. Let's talk about geothermal wisdom, shall we? You might think the Yakshal is just fighting against the desert, arm wrestling the sun with every mud brick muscle it can muster. But the truth is far cleverer. It's not resisting the environment, it's partnering with it. Like a well-trained negotiator who knows how to turn an argument into a dance. You remember that massive pit beneath your feet? That's not just for storage, it's for thermal regulation. The deeper you go, the cooler the earth becomes. This passive geothermal cooling, where underground temperatures remain relatively stable year-round, is baked into the very architecture of the Yakshal. Historians still debate whether the Persian engineers fully understood the geothermal science, or simply noticed that, hey, stuff stays cold if you dig far enough. Either way, they optimized it. The base of the pit is insulated by packed clay and lined with stone, often covered in straw mats to regulate condensation. And every structural detail above domes, vents, materials works with this natural coolness, not against it. You lie back, letting your fingers trace the curved slope of the dome's inner wall. It's gently cool, not refrigerator cold, but steady, confident, the kind of temperature that doesn't need to show off. Above you, light filters in through a single high vent, dust swirling in soft beams. And you realize this vent does double duty, releasing warm air and preventing mold. Because if you trap too much moisture inside a sealed cool space, you invite a damp rebellion, which brings you to another unsung genius of this structure. Airflow balance. The dome's shape isn't just good for keeping hot air away. It creates a natural convection current. As warm air rises through the apex, it pulls in cooler air from vents near the base or via the badgers. The result? A gentle, continuous circulation that prevents stagnation and microbial mischief. Stretch, letting your body become part of this slow, thermal ballet. The floor beneath you holds a kind of ancient calm. You picture how centuries ago, a family might have gathered here during a sandstorm, not to hide, but to rest, to feel something stable, to breathe the one kind of air the desert can't cook. Your guide appears, holding a jar. He doesn't say a word, just hands it to you and sits beside you with a heavy sigh. Inside the jar, small slices of melon floating in slightly sweetened snowmelt. You eat in silence, and each bite feels like an apology from the sun. He points upward. Sky hot, he mutters. Earth, not. That about sums it up. There's a fringe theory among some environmental architects that the Yakshal design specifically, its balance of geothermal insulation and convective airflow, has applications for modern passive cooling. Several experimental homes in hot climates have tried to replicate the principles. Domes with underground storage, wind catchers, reflective surfaces, and wouldn't you know it, they work. Your jar now empty, you lie back again and stare upward. The inside of the dome is a gentle spiral of color browns, ochres, and faded whitewash. Patterns from centuries of patchwork repairs and heat cycles. It's not perfect. It's lived in. A boy walks past, humming, barefoot. He pauses beside the ice pit and casually tosses in a handful of mint leaves. You raise an eyebrow. For smell, he says, already halfway gone. And sure enough, minutes later the air carries a faint whiff of cool green. Even the scent here knows how to chill out. You close your eyes for a while. Not to nap though, that's tempting, but to listen. To the way the dome hums. To the soft drip of meltwater trickling into side channels. To the quiet exhale of air as it flows up, out, onward. And just before you drift, you wonder how many other ancient buildings weren't just shelters, but machines. You wake not with a start, but with a slow blink, the kind that happens when the air is just the right temperature, and the ground has convinced your spine to forgive it. The dome's curve above you is darker now. Late afternoon has slipped. Toward evening, and outside, the shadows have gotten long and gossipy. You sit up with a stretch, only mildly alarmed that you've napped next to a pit of ancient ice. A young woman enters the chamber, eyes scanning the space like someone looking for signs of trouble. Her nose wrinkles. She sniffs again. She walks toward the corner and bends low, peering into a small vented alcove. Then she mutters something that you can only assume means "not again" in extremely annoyed Persian. You rise to investigate, and that's when you smell it, too. A faint mustiness, not unpleasant, but damp, wrong. Like wet laundry left to dream in a basket for too long. Mildew. Yes. Dear sleeper, not even the majestic Yakshal is immune to one of architecture's oldest nemeses. Mold. C. With all the humidity control, the careful airflow, the straw insulation, and the brilliant engineering, it only takes one mistake. One clogged vent, one overfilled channel, one ignored patch of wet sarouge. And boom, you've got a fungus problem. The woman pulls back a reed mat and reveals a tiny patch of discoloration on the wall near the base. She touches it with a fingertip, then wipes her hand on her robe with the weary elegance of someone who's done this far too many times. You follow her as she moves to the top of the dome and checks. The venting mechanism, a simple wooden shutter tied with a rope that can be pulled open or closed depending on the airflow needed. She mutters again and gives it a tug. A gust of warm air escapes, like the yacht shell sighing in relief. Historians still argue how often maintenance was required for these structures. Some sources suggest seasonal inspections were routine, particularly in the spring and early summer. Others claim it was a community responsibility. If your share of the ice started smelling like grandma's damp basement, it was time to get the broom, and it wasn't just the smell. Mold could contaminate water. It could rot straw. It could damage sarouge over time, making walls flake and lose insulation. In short, it could bring ruin. You ask the woman what happens if a mold patch spreads too far. She shrugs. We bake it. You blink. You, what? She leads you outside, around the rear of the yacht, to a clay oven used for repairing sarouge walls. When a patch became compromised, too wet, too soft, too smelly, they'd scrape it out, dry the area, then reapply fresh mortar. In some cases, they would light small controlled fires inside the dome to sweat out excess humidity, then re-air the space with carefully managed venting. Basically, a fungal exorcism. You help her gather a bundle of herbs, dried mint, wormwood, and something that smells suspiciously like aggressive oregano, and she tosses it into a clay bowl, sets it alight, and fans the smoke back into the vent with a woven fan. This, she explains, is a preventative measure. Smoke scares the mildew. She grins. Is it science? Is it tradition? Hard to say. But the yak shell smells nicer already. There's a fringe theory that smoke rituals around yak shells weren't just for sanitation. Some believe they were part of a broader spiritual tradition, ritual cleansing of the space before festivals, or to rebalance the coolness after particularly hot weeks. No hard evidence, but the oral stories persist. You return inside to find others fanning fresh air through the chamber. Someone sprinkles rosewater along the edges of the pit. Another replaces the damp straw layer with a drier one. You're told that monitoring moisture content in straw was considered a kind of apprenticeship. Right, young workers were trained to identify rot by smell, touch, even sound, and when in doubt, burn the smelly bit. As you help clean, you come across a small wooden board etched with symbols. Turns out it's a mildew log, each mark representing a year and event that needed repairs. Some of the oldest marks are faded, but one corner has a carved symbol that looks suspiciously like a donkey's head. You're told this commemorates the year someone's donkey knocked over an entire batch of antifungal herbs. It was apparently hilarious. Later, much later, as twilight deepens, the work is done. The air inside feels fresh again, cooler, dry. The mildew for now is banished. And you realize just how much maintenance this miracle structure requires. It's not a set it and forget it kind of thing. It's alive in a way, breathing, reacting, demanding attention. The woman hands you a small sachet of dried herbs. In case your sandals smell like regret, she says, and walks off. You pocket it with a grin. Because now you know the truth. Even in the world's most brilliant, ancient fridge, there's always a chance the leftovers go funky. The sky is bruising with the final blush of dusk, that dreamy lavender blue hour when even the desert seems to exhale. The dome casts a long sleepy shadow, and you're walking alongside it with a belly full of tea and a growing suspicion that not everyone in this village is playing fair with the ice. You pass a pair of kids whispering near the corner of the yaksho. They freeze when they see you, eyes wide, hands behind their backs in the universal sign of, we definitely did something. Then they bolt, one left, one right. Classic move. You glance down. They've left behind a half-melted ice chip. A clue. Welcome to your new side quest, discovering the secret underworld of ice crime. Turns out, not all of this community's cold treasures stay where they're meant to. You overhear a conversation near the communal oven. Someone's block of stored ice mysteriously shrunk. Another says they've been finding strange footprints near the storage pit in the dead of night. You lean in. Could it be theft? They laugh. At first. But then someone lowers their voice. It's happened before. You're intrigued that you ask your guide. He chuckles dryly and tells you the story of the year of the vanishing frost. It was a particularly hot summer. The harvests had been poor, and suddenly blocks of ice started disappearing from the pit. At first, no one noticed. A little here, a chunk there. But then a whole family's portion was gone. They blamed the donkey. But even the donkey had an alibi. Suspicion spread. People started sleeping near their shares, keeping count, checking the melt patterns. And that's when they caught him, an old fisherman from the far end of town, sneaking in at night to shave off just enough to chill his pickled trout. The punishment? Public shaming and no ice for a week. During a festival. Brutal. You ask if it ever got worse. Your guide looks around, lowers his voice. Some villagers they fought. Turns out, between neighboring communities, ice was more than a resource. It was a matter of pride. And occasionally, of revenge. There's a local legend about two rival towns on either side of a mountain pass. Both had yakshals, both took their ice production very seriously. One night, someone from the southern village snuck over and smashed a rival's freezing pool with a stone mallet. The retaliation? Dumping hot coals into the other's pit, causing a whole week's worth of harvest to melt overnight. Historians still argue whether this story is true or just a cautionary tale told to children who get cocky with their straw baskets. But tablets found in nearby ruins do mention disputes over frozen shares, and even mention the phrase ice raids. Yes, actual raids. Imagine a midnight cavalry, not charging with swords, but with burlap sacks and very careful tongs. Back in the village, you ask if people still steal ice. The response is a mix of amused shrugs and silent glances. No one confesses, but no one denies it either. You pass a storage corner where a few blocks are marked with charcoal symbols. These are ownership glyphs, each family's personal sign, like a desert monogram. You see stars, fish, one surprisingly detailed cat face. These marks are supposed to deter theft. Supposed to. You hear a boy bragging that he once replaced a block of ice with a very convincing rock, just to see if his neighbor would notice. He did, after serving lukewarm wine to a guest of honor. The boy says he's still not allowed near the good spoons. You realize there's an entire subculture around ice here: rivalries, pranks, disputes. It's not chaos, it's managed mischief. An outlet for competition in a place where so much depends on cooperation. The yakshal, for all its science and symmetry, is also a stage. And sometimes people just can't resist a little drama. As night deepens, the cooler air wraps around the dome like a protective cloak. You walk slowly along the perimeter, half listening for footfalls that don't belong. You find none tonight. But that doesn't mean they weren't here yesterday. You reach the rear wall and find a fresh footprint in the sand, small, barefoot, headed toward the storage pit. You smile. Maybe the ice didn't melt too fast. Maybe someone's just been running an underground snowball speakeasy. Tonight, you're walking with purpose. Your sandals scuff the dusty path, still warm from a day of sunbathing. The stars above are sharp and countless, as if someone poked holes in the sky just to let the cold in. You're not heading to the yakshal. This time, not to chill out. Not to help scrape ice or debate the ethics of straw placement. You're delivering a cube. Specifically, a hand-cut block of frost-crusted mint-scented ice, carefully wrapped in 3 layers of reed matting and gohair. Cloth, strapped to the back of a small donkey that seems deeply unimpressed with your mission. The recipient? The king. Well, a shah, technically. A minor regional ruler who insists on chilled pomegranate sherbet every night, even when the sand outside is trying to ignite your thoughts. Your guide is walking beside you with the weary authority of someone who's made this delivery far too many times. He says it helps his digestion, he mutters, adjusting the pack. You trudge together toward the hilltop palace, a squat compound wrapped in patterned tiles, bathed in torchlight. You pass through a guarded gate, nod at the spear-wielding teenager who's more invested in his plum snack than national security, and finally arrive at a courtyard where musicians pluck slow tunes and court servants fan the night air like they're trying to swat away humidity itself. Your cube is lifted like treasure, carried reverently across the marble floor, placed in a brass bowl filled with crushed herbs and flower petals. And as you watch the blocks slowly weep into the mixture, the royal chef leans close and whispers, "Don't let it crack this time." You blink. "Crack?" He nods gravely. "Last week's was too warm." The top split. His Highness called it emotionally unstable ice. You try not to laugh. You fail. The court is full of these tiny dramas. The ice must be cold, of course, but not too cold. It must sweat delicately, like a courtesan on a summer night. It must melt slowly, and above all, must be presented. Because here, ice isn't just refreshment. It's status. Historians still debate exactly how much of a luxury ice was among Persian elites. Some records suggest royal courts had their own dedicated yachtshell's smaller versions, built purely for the comfort of the privileged. Others imply ice was shipped in from villages, especially during large festivals or diplomatic events. In any case, what's clear is this: if you had ice, you had power. You wander the edge of the courtyard and watch as the chef ladles chilled rosewater over the melting block. It hisses softly. The scent is intoxicating. Delicate cups are filled. Courtiers sip. Someone sighs dramatically. You're handed a small cup, yours by virtue of effort, not title, and it's like drinking liquid starlight. Cold, floral, fleeting. You spot a familiar face, one of the ice harvesters from the village, now dressed in borrowed finery, blending in. You raise your cup. He raises his. You both know who really made this moment happen. Then, across the courtyard, someone coughs out loudly, deliberately. Everyone freezes. The Shah waves a hand. "Who's that?" he asks, gesturing to you. Your guide whispers quickly. The Shah tilts his head, then waves again. "Double his portion," he says, "and no more cracks." You nod dumbly. Later you find out that this one ice delivery done just right earns your village extra allocation during the hot weeks. One perfectly behaved cube buys a little more time, a little more comfort. The price of frost, paid in favor. It also earns you a nickname among the kids: Ice Whisperer. You do not correct them. And here's the strange thing: you start to feel it. The ceremony, the reverence. This isn't frivolity. This is survival made beautiful. There's a fringe theory that ice at court wasn't just about status, but also subtle politics. Those who controlled the yakshuls controlled the refreshment. Those who delivered the cubes controlled the mood. In a climate like this, the difference between warm wine and cold sherbet could influence an alliance, or at the very least, a marriage proposal. As the night stretches on, dancers perform slow routines under the moonlight, and you lean against a tiled wall, watching your cube's last breath swirl in rose-scented mist. You realize something almost hilarious. This is the only party in history where the guest of honor melts before dessert. You help pack the remaining gear and begin the walk back to the village. The donkey lighter now and far more smug. Behind you, the palace glows, the music fades. And above you, the stars, cold, perfect, and likely judging your sandals, watch it all in silence. You return to the village at dawn, bleary-eyed, slightly sticky, and a little more knowledgeable about royal beverage preferences than anyone ever asked for. As you approach the yaksha, you hear a familiar sound, the soft scrape of ice being lifted from straw, the hushed clink of clay jars touching. and the occasional chuckle of someone who's clearly been awake too, long and has moved past language into pure existential muttering. You settle in beside your guide, who hands you a hunk of sweetbread and gestures toward the distant horizon. "They're coming," he says. You squint. Over the dunes, a small caravan trudges forward, mules, baskets, a few dusty banners flapping in the morning wind. Travelers, traders, and, judging by the heavy sacks strapped to their animals, visiting. Dignitaries from a Greek-speaking land where sandals are crisp, noses are raised, and opinions about Persian engineering are suspiciously vocal. Oh yes, it's that kind of visit that the group arrives mid-morning, dismounting with dramatic sighs, and adjusting robes as though simply being in the desert is a personal attack. One man, draped in layers of indigo linen and very self-satisfied facial hair, approaches the yachol like it might bite. "This," he announces, "is where you keep the ice?" You nod. He raises an eyebrow. "In the desert?" Still nodding, he steps forward and touches the dome wall, recoiling slightly at the coolness. He mutters, clearly re-evaluating his entire worldview. You and your guide exchange a glance that translates roughly to, "Here we go again." See, back in the day, ancient Greek writers had a lot of feelings about Persia. Some admired it. Many, however, liked to portray the Persian Empire as decadent, overly complex, and full of ideas that just couldn't possibly work, especially when those ideas involved things like storing ice in the desert. But let's not forget, the Persians were running efficient water systems and hosting ice-enhanced feasts, while some Greek outposts were still figuring out indoor plumbing. One particularly dramatic historian, whose name rhymes with Herodotus, mentioned Persian feasts with chilled wine and mountains of fruit in midsummer, and essentially wrote, "And then they did what?" In fancy classical Greek, your new Greek visitor walks around the dome, pokes at a straw mat, peers down into the pit, and then, with a faint sniff, says, "We build with marble." Your guide leans in and whispers, "Yes, we use mud." Touché. There's a fringe theory that these interactions weren't just diplomatic, they were competitive. Ancient empires flexed not only through conquest, but through climate control. If you could keep cool under pressure, literally, you had more than military power. You had environmental mastery. The Greeks brought geometry. The Persians brought geothermal architecture. The visitor eventually relents and asks to try some of the famed chilled drinks. You bring him a clay cup filled with icy sherbet, topped with a fresh mint leaf and the faintest hint of smugness. He sips. He blinks. He nods. "What's it called?" He asks. You answer, "Cold." He blinks again. You think about how these two cultures, Persian and Greek, will eventually collide in full during the campaigns of a guy named Alexander. But for now, here in this sleepy village, the only battle happening is between one man's ego and a very humble chunk of ice. Later that evening, you find the Greek delegation resting in the shade of the yachol. Their robes are loosened, their sandals kicked off. One of them is chewing on a frozen grape and fanning himself with what might be someone else's scroll. The original skeptic approaches you. "I will admit," he says, slowly, "that this is rather ingenious." You smile. "It works." He nods. "Perhaps we could build something similar." Your guide leans in, deadpan. "With marble?" The man chuckles. "Perhaps with some adjustments." You spend the evening sharing stories of wind catchers and buried aqueducts, of dome curves and lime mortar sorcery. And for a brief moment, ancient world politics melt like ice in tea. Historians often debate what these exchanges meant. Were technologies traded? Did ideas cross borders? Was a Greek engineer ever caught sketching a yachol in secret? Hard to say. But one thing is clear, respect is a lot easier to build when everyone's drinking something cold. As the stars prick the sky again, and the yachol glows softly in the moonlight, you watch the visitors settle in for the night blankets near The dome drinks at the ready dot, and somewhere in the distance, a sandal clinks quietly against a cup, a silent toast to cooling off and showing off. The next morning arrives wrapped in dusty gold. You've given up pretending your robe isn't constantly damp with sweat. Persia's summer doesn't deal in subtlety, but you've gained something else. Curiosity. Deep, delicious, sleepy curiosity. You sit with the village elder, who smells like figs and faint disapproval, and unroll a small clay tablet you found near the yakshal. It's rectangular, the size of your hand, and inscribed with tiny wedge-shaped symbols, cuneiform. You try to squint your way into understanding it, but unless it says, "This side up," you're out of luck. The elder grunts and hands it off to a younger man, who traces the lines with a practiced finger. It's not a prayer, he says. It's inventory. He reads aloud slowly. Dates, barley, ice, 2 goats, 1 possibly angry chicken. You lean in. Ice? On a tablet? Historians still debate the role of ice in the Persian economy. Was it just seasonal and symbolic? Or was it formalized, valued, possibly even taxed? You're now holding a fragment that hints at answers. Or maybe it's just someone's fancy grocery list. The young man continues. It records weight. Probably a block of ice traded for a basket of wheat. Or wine, or both, depending on how melty it was. That's the thing ice doesn't travel. Well, even wrapped in straw and shade, it has a shelf life measured in hours. Yet it was traded, stored, tracked, prized. You look up and imagine the scene. A merchant arriving with his caravan, sweaty and sunburned, offering goods in exchange for a block of fresh yak. It's handed over like treasure, immediately rushed to a cellar or shared among family, chipped into tea, added to stew, pressed to foreheads. The emotional value was high. The economic value? Still a mystery. There's a story the elder tells, half real, half legend, about a merchant who once offered a silver ring for a single cube of ice during a heat wave. The ice was accepted. The ring was returned. The village gained reputation instead. Ice, then, wasn't just commodity. It was credibility. You look at another tablet, this one older, cracked, with faded etchings. A priest's record, perhaps. The symbols mention cool water from the yak well. You wonder if this was an early way of recording climate events. A hot year, less ice. A stormy winter, overflowing channels. It's data. Personal, handwritten, sweaty data. You ask your guide if taxes were ever paid in ice. He shrugs. Sometimes favors. Sometimes blocks. Depends on who wanted a cold bath. So basically, yes, a fringe theory suggests certain Persian governors reserved the right to claim a portion of each village's ice harvest as tribute. It wasn't enforced strictly. It depended on politics, heat, and whether the governor's wife had a sore throat, but it added a layer of bureaucracy to an already melt-prone resource. And that led to all sorts of little tricks, marking your blocks with misleading symbols, claiming a batch had spoiled, losing ice en route to the palace. There are even whispers of ice kept in decoy pits, hidden from official tallies and used for private feasts. You smile at the thought. Ancient ice tax evasion. The elder points at the clay tablet again. This symbol, he says, we think it means melted, like ruined. He nods, like someone failed their task. That lands hard. Because now you realize this wasn't just science. It was responsibility. Keeping the yakshal cold wasn't a job. It was trust. Break that trust, and the whole village felt it. The feast suffered. The sick went without relief. The ceremony had to wait for next moon, and yet there's no panic here, no alarms, no timers or sensors, just observation. Intuition. The quiet pressure of knowing that frost is fragile. You roll the tablet back into its cloth and thank the elder. He nods once and says, "We don't write stories in the cold, but the cold writes stories in us." Poetic guy, that one dot as you leave this small archive chamber. You pass another elder muttering over a new tally today's inventory. She's etching names beside weight marks, adjusting family symbols, updating the rotation. Because the cold may melt, but the system holds dot, and even when the ice disappears, the records remain. The sky has shifted again. Now it's the color of old parchment, tinged with amber, and there's a breeze dry slow, like a memory you're not quite sure you lived. You've returned to the edge of the yakshal with a warm cup of tea, because, yes, even in the desert, some people voluntarily drink hot things when it's already 42 degrees Celsius. You're not sure if it's tradition, stubbornness, or science pretending to be a dare. Across from you, a small girl is arranging pebbles into a dome. Shape. Her older brother ruins it immediately and runs off giggling. She sighs with the exhaustion of a philosopher trapped in a child's body and begins again. You watch her as your guide settles beside you, groaning as he folds into a seated position like a collapsing library shelf. He points toward the yakshal. Won't be here forever, he says. You blink. What, this one? He nods. Any of them. And he's not wrong. You spend the afternoon walking with him through what used to be the edge of town. A place where 3 yakshals once stood, side by side, like a row of sleepy giants. 2 are now piles of rubble. One is barely standing, its dome cracked, its pit filled with wind-blown sand. The sarouge peeled like tired skin. He explains that industrial refrigeration reached these parts slowly. First, imported ice in insulated carts. Then diesel-powered freezers, then small refrigerators humming in corner shops. Each one made the yakshals a little less vital, a little less sacred. They were still used for a time maintained by habit, visited during festivals, remembered in wedding songs. But fewer people learned the signs of mold. Fewer children fetched straw for insulation. The deep channels ran dry. And eventually, the dome stopped whispering. There's a silence here. A respectful one. Like visiting an old teacher's house. Long after the last lesson, you touch the wall of the half-collapsed dome. It's warm now. No ice inside. No straw. No mint tucked in corners. Just dust. And a bird's nest built in a crack near the top. Historians still argue whether the fall of the yakshals was inevitable. Some say it was progress, a natural shift in infrastructure. Others argue that something was lost. That sustainability, elegance, and local knowledge were traded too quickly for plugs and parts and warranties that expire faster than trust. Your guide sighs. People forgot how to listen to the air. That sticks with you, because the yakshal isn't just a building. It's a conversation with temperature, with airflow, with the earth itself. And when that conversation ends, something quieter takes its place. You ask if any are still maintained. He nods. A few. In Yazd, in smaller villages, some still used for Nowruz ice. Others preserved by sheer stubborn pride. There's even a revival. Movement architects trying to learn the old ways, study the sarouge. We build domes not from blueprints, but from memory. They mix lime and ash. They whisper over the drying walls. They hoped out. One group even tried building a modern yakshal in the mountains, with solar panels added. Yes, but with the same old principles. Domes, vents, deep pits. They harvested ice in winter, kept it through spring, served it in summer with mulberries and silence, and it worked. Not perfectly, but enough to prove something. As evening settles in, you return to your village's yakshal. The dome still stands, still hums, with its low, cooling exhale. Children play in the dust outside. Someone's singing again off-key, joyfully, arms sticky with rose syrup. You sit with your back against the wall. You feel the cool seep into your spine, your shoulders, your breath. Not cold. Not icy, just calm, and you realize the genius wasn't just in keeping ice. It was in keeping cool. Not temperature, mindset, the dome, the kanat, The sarouj, the wind, they didn't just tame heat. They taught patience. They taught awareness. They taught that sustainability isn't a slogan. It's a dome built with goat hair and egg whites that still works. You close your eyes, and the wind slips past, whispering thanks to the ones who remembered to build with air. You don't leave the yakshul so much as drift from it, feet dusty, shoulders warm, breath slow. Your sandals crunch softly over the packed earth as you take one last walk around the dome, hand trailing along its sun-baked curves like you're trying to memorize its texture through your fingertips. The evening air has cooled just enough to flirt with comfort. The last ice harvest of the week is already underway. You hear the soft scrape of wooden paddles and the occasional splash, like tiny applause from the freezing pools beyond the courtyard. This time, you don't help. You just watch. The families move like dancers in familiar choreography. A mother gestures to her son to slow his scoop, to keep the surface smooth. An old man adjusts the straw coverings just so, muttering ancient advice to no one in particular. A girl fans her little sister while holding a chip of ice against her own temple like a tiny crown. And in the center of it all, the dome. Quiet. Humble. Essential. Someone hands you a small clay bowl filled with the last slivers of rose-flavored ice for the evening. You sip slowly, the cold melting across your tongue like silk. Then you lie down, right there, on a mat beside the dome's entrance, under the whispering wind tower, where the walls breathe out cool air like the sighs of long-gone engineers who knew what they were doing. You close your eyes. The wind above catches. It slips through the badger and down into the dome, over the sleeping ice pit, past the cracked sarouj walls and across your skin. It's not just cool, it's ancient. Like a memory too patient to fade. Your guide sits beside you, crosses his legs, and says nothing. He doesn't need to, because tonight, there's nothing left to explain. The dome has told its story, with every curve, every shadow, every frosted grape and whispered breeze. And you've heard it. Now, as your body softens and your thoughts begin to drift, feel the coolness that still lingers in your breath. Let it trace a gentle path across your cheeks and shoulders. The sounds of the desert fade distant, muted, softened like footsteps in sand. You are safe, cool, carried. Picture the dome one more time, rising in the starlight, ancient and unbothered, its curves softened by wind and time. Inside, the ice rests, unmoving, sleeping, just like you're about to do. Above you, the stars flicker, not urgently, but patiently, like they've seen this before. Thousands of times. A dome, a breeze, a body settling into sleep. Let your breath slow, following the rhythm of the air that winds through those ancient vents. Inhale the memory of rosewater, exhale the heat of the day. Each breath a little softer, a little longer. There is nothing to do now, no steps to take, no thoughts to chase. Only this moment, this calm, this dome-shaped hush, where even the desert cools its fury, and frost dreams quietly under straw. Sleep now. Let the breeze keep watch. Let the dome remember for you. Good night. Greater than end of script. Sweet dreams.